As much as we enjoy making these podcasts, we also love listening to other horror podcasts. Our guest today is Sapphire Sandalo, the host and creator of Stories with Sapphire. It's a podcast that shares supernatural stories from around the world. She shares with us how she got started with her experience with the paranormal and a touching story about her lolo. Enjoy. Today on this episode, we have a guest. I actually heard her podcast around 3 weeks ago. I was looking for things to listen to on Spotify, and I found her podcast. What's interesting was it's a mix. It's a mix of personal stories. It's a mix of other people's stories and a mix of research stories, I'm assuming. So, Sapphire, can you tell us about your journey in the paranormal? From your first episode, you told us that you started to interview your grandfather about it. Is it okay to share your story for that?
Sure. So my obsession with the paranormal and ghost stories began from a very, very young age. The concept of ghosts and spirits was something that was always discussed in my house. So it was always something that in my head I believed to be real. And my grandpa, he had just a bunch of different stories and experiences from when he lived in the Philippines. He's seriously seen and experienced everything. So aswang, regular ghosts, white woman, what else was there? Capre, duende, everything. And so there was one night, I remember my grandparents came to our house and we were all eating dinner, and my grandpa had told some of these stories before, but I don't remember why that particular night I decided to record them. I had a tape recorder, maybe because the tape recorder was new, I'm not sure, but we had this idea to record my grandpa's stories, and I use bits of that audio in my podcast, which I think is really cool.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I wish the audio was better, though. You can't super understand it, but I can. So that's sort of how it started, just being immersed in it from a very young age. Like, I don't remember a time when ghost stories were not a part of my life, if that makes sense.
Yeah. From your extro, you talk about for Patreons, you could offer do a tarot reading. So, when did you start to experience, what's your first experience with regards to the paranormal?
You know what is so funny is that people always ask me, "Oh, well, you must have some wild stories because you do this work." And honestly, not really.
Okay.
I think I think the reason why I am so interested in learning about people's experiences is because I have had so few. And it actually really wasn't until the last year or so where I would say that there's been a couple things that I would probably deem paranormal. I'm still not sure if they were, but they could be. But for the most part, not a whole lot has happened to me. And that's why I'm so obsessed with people telling me about it. I consider myself a believer, but a part of me is like, I want to super believe. And that's why I talk to so many people who've had experiences.
From the people you've interviewed, there's a Filipina shaman, right?
Yes, Lynn Pacificar.
Actually, from her stories and the stories of the people we've interviewed who have a third eye, all the stories match up. And that's one of the things I want to ask you, given the rich cast of cryptids and elementals we have here in the Philippines. I would assume that some of them are not local to our country. From the Americans you've talked to, who you could say have their third eye open, do they see little folk like our duendes? Large creature living in the trees like capres or tekbalangs?
No, I would say that they don't talk about it. Okay. That's why I talk about it so much. As you can imagine, I guest on a lot of paranormal shows. And
yes.
Whenever they ask me, what my favorite cryptids are, favorite creatures, I always bring up the manananggal. That's my favorite one. And they're like, I've never heard of that. Like, it's so wild to me just because it's something that I've known my entire life, something my grandpa also says he encountered one day. And so, yeah, it's really cool to share these types of things with people. I am literally learning about new creatures and folklore all the time. So it's just really fun for me.
Because recently I was listening to another podcast, a local podcast, and they were saying duendes were particularly playful, and if you're good to them, they will actually find ways to give you money. And then we talked to this exorcist, and he was saying they would call them bantays, guardians, sort of guardians, and these particular duendes gave him a car, and he told us all about it. He told us all about it. He couldn't see them, but he had a friend who could. And then I keep thinking about leprechauns. Because leprechaun's supposed to be, so I see the correlation there, that it's possible that in Ireland, they have the same elementals there. I have this theory that, I'm not sure, maybe you can answer this. From all the people you've talked to, the people who have an open third eye, are they mostly Asian, or have you heard Caucasians with lots of third eye stories?
I have. I for my podcast specifically, I like to seek out more Asians and Filipinos just because there's such a lack of representation in specifically American media. And so I seek them out. But there is also a lot of non-people of color who have a third eye, have lots of experiences. But whenever I interview people, I always ask them what their lineage is.
Yes.
Because there's been a couple people who, like, I thought were white, and then as I was talking to them, they shared that they had some Native American in them, or something else. And to me, I feel like I don't know, there are ties to the spiritual world in every culture, but it's different for each. Like Filipinos' relationship to the paranormal, I feel like, is different from white people's or Mexicans. They're all a little bit unique.
Because based on some observations, because we've interviewed a few who have a gift, or they have this sensitivity, and some of them, most of them actually, come from the southern part of the Philippines, Cebu going down. So Cebu, Samar, Leyte. I'm not sure if you've heard of it also. There's this place in Leyte, Samar, they call Sun City, Beringan City.
Yes, I've heard of it.
Okay. So one of our co-hosts actually lives near that area, and she's had tales from her grandmother of that supposed to be modern civilized city. So her grandmother's never been to Manila. So this was maybe in the 60s. She's never been to Manila, so she's never seen high-rise buildings with lots of lights. But she was describing it to them way before, because she saw this city for some reason while she was walking home from church.
Yeah. Right.
Since you reach out to mostly Asians, did you notice any pattern with regards to which race had more of a natural sensitivity to this invisible world? Or are you mostly looking for Filipinos to interview?
A majority of the people that I interview are Filipinos. I actually, every now and then, I'll just search for people on Instagram who are doing paranormal stuff, and I'm like, "Hey, do you have any stories?"
Yeah.
And most of the time, they do. And I'm like, I'm never surprised, because most of them do. Yeah. So I mean, I guess I would say probably Filipinos, but there definitely are. I mean, I interview people because they have they've had some sort of experience. So, and I feel like I have a pretty diverse group of people that I've interviewed, and that's something else that's really cool, is that just a reminder that, like, this is kind of a universal experience. Like, maybe not everyone believes in these types of things, but it can happen to anyone, and that's something that I think is really cool.
Looking at the stuff you're doing this thing, paranormal caught on camera. Have you caught stuff on camera aside from ghosts or elementals? Or
so My role on that show is to comment on other people's videos.
Okay.
So, yeah, so it's a clip show. So basically what happens is people who think they've caught something on camera that they believe is paranormal, they submit it to the show, and then they have this like panel of experts comment on the video and sort of speculate on what they think it could be. We're not debunking anything. We're talking about like, if this is real, what could it be? And there's been a lot. It's really fun because I'm the only Filipino person on the panel.
Okay.
Actually, the only person of color. And I've been trying to change that. I've sent them names and they're not doing anything about it, but it's fine. And so I've sort of become the resident, like, Filipino Asian commenter when I think they intentionally try to find more clips from the Philippines so that I can comment on it, which is fun for me because that's the stuff I love talking about. So I get really excited when they have clips from the Philippines. But yeah.
Are you particularly interested in any, with regards to the paranormal, are you more inclined to knowing more about the spirit realm or the elemental realm? Or
the stuff that I am personally the most drawn to is like ghosts, spirits, demons, things like that. I used to think that like cryptids and aliens were a totally separate category, but the more that I learn about the paranormal, I realize that everything is sort of from the same stuff. Like it's all related to each other, but we just view them as very different things. So that's been kind of cool to learn. Like, like, are you familiar with orbs?
Yes, the glowing
balls of light. Right. So when we see them here down on Earth, we think, oh, that's an orb. That's what we call it. But then if you see it in the sky, you call it a UFO. You think it's aliens. But really, it's the same thing. So that's something that I'm learning about now, which is kind of cool.
That's a nice revel. Actually, now that you talk about it, that makes sense. With regards to animation, did you start out drawing paranormal things or?
No. So even though I loved ghost stories and the paranormal as a kid, I was a huge scaredy cat.
Okay. We all are.
Like such a scaredy cat. So even though I loved all of these things, I still distanced myself from it. I loved hearing the stories, but then making it real with drawings, I was like, maybe too much. Even though my mom gave me this little book that I made, I think when I was in 4th grade, and it was like me drawing like a nightmare that I had, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. So I guess I did sort of do spooky stuff when I was little, but most of the stuff I drew when I was little was Sailor Moon.
Okay.
Anime, that kind of stuff. It really wasn't until I got older that I like went full force into the spooky stuff, and I was like, yeah, I'm not scared anymore.
Are you not scared anymore?
I go back and forth. I have days where I'm like, I'm gonna just mess around with the Ouija board and nothing's gonna happen to me. And then there's other days where I'm scared to just be in my house alone. I go back and forth. I don't know if you could. I have like a Ouija board mouse pad. I have a Ouija board rug. I have a Ouija board over there. Like I'm all about it.
Yeah.
But then there's days because I'll hear some stories where people are like, yeah, I messed with the Ouija board and something really bad happened. And then I go, oh. So yeah, I go back and forth.
Because based on some stories you've heard, and some theories from people who have third eye, they say that if you do the Ouija board, you're just attracting the elements or spirits nearby. So even if you call on someone, if you don't have a certain gift, you cannot draw them to you.
Yeah, and I think the thing that makes me, because I used to be terrified of them, but now I embrace them, obviously. I think it's also part of my way of making myself less scared of it too. But the way that I look at them, also just learning about the history of them makes me less afraid. But the Ouija board, as well as any other tool in the paranormal world, it's actually not necessary. Like if you are going to communicate with something, you're going to be able to do it like with your body, with yourself. The object is just there as to help you focus. But like I don't have the gift, so I know that like when I use it, nothing's gonna happen. And I also know that intention's a huge part of it too. So if I'm not truly intending on drawing anything to me, then I'll be fine. That's what I think anyway.
Actually, that's one of my questions. That came up from one of our interviews also. Where did you learn about that? You have to have the intention to, let's say, to repel a spirit, to repel evil feelings. Where did you learn about that?
I don't remember. I think it's a culmination of listening to a lot of people's
Okay.
stories, and then yeah, I don't know if there was like one specific person who told me that, or if I learned that one place, but that's something that I gathered somehow, where it's like, oh, it's us. We are the Ouija board. We are the tool to contact things.
Have you heard of Reiki?
Yes.
Oh, have you talked to anyone or have you had experiences with that?
You know, I haven't dove too deep within that. It's something, I used to not. So I guess like maybe years and years ago when I first heard of Reiki,
Yeah.
I feel like as most people would view it as, oh, you put your hands over someone and then you heal them. Like it's very easy to write off as complete nonsense. But then the more that I learn about how energy works and how it affects us, the more I realize, oh, of course that's a real thing. And then also like I have stories within my family. Like there's a couple years ago when my grandpa was still here, but he was very sick. There was someone in my family went to go see him, held his hand, and then like my grandpa wouldn't let go. And then he felt, not my grandpa, my uncle felt very drained. And then when he let go and then left, like after he went back home, like my grandpa felt so much better.
Okay.
Like he was walking again, he was eating, like he just got this burst of energy from my uncle. And I thought that was so fascinating. And it reinforced this belief that like, oh yeah, like the power of touch, the power of people to transfer energy to each other, like that's a very, very real thing.
Do you have a favorite story from your family that you would like to, I mean, you recollect from time to time or share with others?
Yes, I have a couple that I tell on every single
Okay.
podcast that I go to, which is like so funny. I really wish I had ones of my own that I could share, because I feel so bad that I'm like, sorry family, I'm going to keep telling your stories, but your stories are so much better than the like tiny ones that I have. So this actually happened to my cousin when she was 3 years old, and then my aunt, so her mom and her sister, they were outside of the bedroom. My little cousin was in the bedroom just playing by herself, and then all of a sudden she started screaming. And so my aunt and my cousin go into the room and they see her crying. She's grabbing pillows and toys and throwing it in this one corner of the room. And then my aunt asks her, like, what's wrong? Like, why are you crying and screaming? And then my little cousin says, tell the little red girl I don't want to play with her. And so they were like, what? Because they couldn't see a little red girl in the corner. So they picked her up. She was still crying, so they picked her up and took her in the car, and they drove to McDonald's to try to calm her down. And so they, after she calmed down a little bit, they were like, okay, we should probably head back home and clean up the mess that she made in the room. So they go up to the room, and when they open the door, all of the things that she had thrown were put back.
Goosebumps. Wow.
So they left again.
Okay.
After that. But like apparently, I think my aunt was talking to one of their neighbors after this had happened, and the neighbor told them that there was a little girl who had died in that apartment complex years ago, and so she thinks that maybe that was her. And what's so wild about this, I remember when my cousins told me this, because I was really little when this happened.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm never going to her apartment again. It was so scary. And then now that we're older, I remember asking my cousin about that day. And I was like, do you remember any of that? And she was like, you know what? She was like, I used to play with her all the time. Like she it wasn't like a stranger. But for whatever reason, that particular day is when she was like, I don't want to play with you.
They got
Because
mad
she
at
freaked
you.
her out or something. Yeah, I don't know. Ugh, it's so creepy. That's like one of my favorites.
Yeah. So does your cousin see other things? Maybe she's sensitive to some spirit.
Oh no, she is.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's in your
300%
blood. I mean that it's in your blood, yeah.
It is, yeah. It's on my actually, I think it's both on both sides. My mom's side definitely has more I know more of the stories on my mom's side. My dad is a super skeptic, but he has had experiences of his own. And there's like all these moments where I'm like, I think you're psychic too. Like that's sort of been the joke throughout our entire life. Me and my sister are always like, Dad's psychic. But because he's a skeptic, he's never really like embraced it or admitted to it. But I'm like, man, how powerful would you be if you embraced it, So that's why I'm like, I want to embrace it. It's on both of my parents have it. So I'm like, why am I never experiencing anything though? So I'm trying to like work on that.
Can I ask, who's from Cebu? Your dad or both of them are from Cebu?
Both of them.
Both of them Cebu. Would you know if your grandparents Cebu also?
Let me see.
From both sides. Just to do a trace.
I'm trying to remember. I know that my grandpa lived in the mountains somewhere, and I cannot remember which mountains.
Okay.
I want to say he was from Negros.
Okay. Okay.
Does that sound right? And then
I have to check.
my maternal grandma grew up in
Zamboanga.
So that's still Cebu.
Sorry?
Or no. Dumaguete. My grandma grew up in Dumaguete. Okay. Which is that's still Cebu, right? Or no?
I have to check.
Oh no,
even I don't know. I'm sorry.
I think so.
Yeah.
It's okay. There's so many islands.
Yes.
It's so funny just because like I obviously I only know the cities that I visited or like mean something to my family, so I just assume everyone knows where these places are, and I'm like, oh, of course, why would you know every single city?
I know the cities, I know the names, but geographically, I'm challenged.
Just geographically,
yeah. So I have to check. Have you been to the Philippines? Have you visited?
I have, yes, a couple times.
Which parts?
First time I went, always Cebu.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's always where we stay. Yeah, with family. We'll fly into Manila and then fly again to Cebu, Mactan Island, and then we stay there.
How do you find it? Meaning, did you see? I mean, did you experience anything while you were here, or just stories from relatives?
I haven't, and it's so shocking to me that nothing has happened to me when I was in the Philippines. But I think the next time I go back, I'm pretty sure something will happen because I'll be more aware of it. Yeah. I don't know.
Because one of the people we talked to who cultivated his sensitivity, he's saying that if you keep looking for it, you're going to see it. You're going to find it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you intentionally shut it out, you're really not gonna. So again, it's that intention thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So maybe if you you work hard on thinking that I want to see you might see.
Yeah, it'll happen for me.
It'll happen.
It's already slowly started happening.
Oh really? Okay. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, but again, like they're things that I could easily debunk, but I don't know. I mean, maybe that's how it all starts. Is like these tiny little things. And it all like kind of happened after my grandpa passed in July of last year.
Oh, condolences.
Yeah, he was like I mentioned, he's the one who had this like really strong tie with all of these stories and ghosts and stuff. And so it was interesting because after he passed, I was like, I need to see a ghost. Like I guess like I wanted it more than I ever wanted it before. I was like, because I want to like see my grandpa or like feel like he's here. And like there's been moments where I'm like, oh, I think he is like showing himself. But again, maybe it's not paranormal, but like for example, the the Tuesday after he passed, we all went to my grandma's house because we were preparing for the funeral, and I was making the video slideshow. And so I had all the photo albums out on the floor, and I was sitting in front of my grandpa's stereo system. And so it was behind me. And then, we're all talking, whatever. And all of a sudden I hear this sound, and do you remember those CD changers where you can put like multiple CDs in it and it rotates? So he had one of those, and I hear that sound, the sound of it rotating. So I turn around and I look, and I'm like, what is that sound? Where is it coming from? But everything is off. So I'm like, I was like, did anyone else hear that? Yeah. And then my cousin, the one who saw the little red girl, she was like, oh yeah, it's been doing that all morning. And what was like kind of cool was that later that night, my uncle called me because I was no longer at the house, but my uncle was there, and he called. He was like, hey, Saph, you heard the stereo or whatever move or something, right? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, that's happening to us too. Like, so it's it's never happened before. Like, that's not something that it does. And so for whatever reason that day, that sound would happen. And so my theory is like, oh, maybe Grandpa was trying to play music for us because we were all there in the house. Or maybe it was just malfunctioning because it was old. I don't know. So yeah, it's like that one, like it's kind of cool to think if it was my grandpa, but again, it doesn't necessarily mean it was him.
Yeah.
But another really cool thing that I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is Grandpa, was I forget when exactly this was. It might have been October of last year, but so I added like a photo. I have a little altar over here to the left. You can't see it. But I added a photo of him and me to my altar. So I sort of just like talked to him every morning, just like, hi, Grandpa. And there was just one day where I was like, I don't know. I was just really depressed and down for a lot of reasons. And I was just like, Grandpa, if you could make yourself known somehow today, that would be really cool and appreciated. And so I sat down on my desk, and maybe like half an hour later, my hands are here, like, working on my keyboard, and all of a sudden I see this moth fly, and it landed inches away from my hand, and I froze, and I was like, Grandpa, is that you? And I held my finger out, and it flew onto my finger. And so I looked at it, and I was just like, I was frozen. I was just like, oh my God, this is so cool. And I was like, thanks, Grandpa. And then it like flew away, and then it flew onto my wall, and it stayed there for like a couple of hours before it like disappeared. Again, maybe it's not him. Maybe it was just a random moth that flew on my finger, but like just the timing of everything. And also just like the meaning of moths in Filipino folklore. Yes. I was just like, it's literally the spirits of ancestors. So I was like, I think this is Grandpa. Yeah, so little stuff like that.
That's beautiful.
Thanks.
And I mean, it's sort of a closure for you for wanting that for so long. Yeah. Moving to another topic. Do you believe in trinkets that you could use for protection? Do you use any personally?
Oh, I know. I'm like looking around myself. Well, I have like crystals and stuff.
Okay.
But the thing about crystals, I kind of go back and forth on them. I think that it's the same effect, like how we were talking about earlier about the importance of intention. I don't know if crystals inherently can do anything, or if it's me believing that this thing represents a certain thing, and so every time I look at it, it's reminding me, putting me in the headspace of protecting myself. Okay. So like this one, for example, this is a selenite egg. Selenite is really good for protection, like clear. It's all of the like white clear crystals are very good for clearing out any negative energy, keeping things positive. So if I believe that, if I truly believe it, every time I look at this egg, I'm going to be reminded of that, and then my mind is going to be like, you're protected, everything's fine, so that's sort of how I see it. That's the way that the least like woo-woo way of looking at it, in my opinion.
Well, we've taken up a lot of your time. Do you have any like advocacies or projects you'd want to tell us about?
Yeah. I guess my podcast.
Yes, of course.
My podcast is called Stories with Sapphire. You can listen to it anywhere. You just search for the name. My name has two P's. A lot of people misspell it. So every other week, I release a podcast episode, and that the podcast deals with the paranormal more from the non-fictional side. So I speak with real people who've had real experiences, and then I offer my personal insight on their stories, things that I've learned. It's really just like a documentation of everything that I'm currently learning. You know, like I'm technically a paranormal expert on TV, but like you can't be an expert in this stuff because you're constantly learning new things, you know. And so that's every other week, every other Wednesday. And then I also have a YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Sapphire Sandalo. That's my name. And so the weeks that I don't release a podcast, I release a YouTube video where I tell a fictional scary story and then I add animation to it. So that's more just like spooky fun type of like fiction. Yeah.
I really like to say I love the podcast because when you put in the sound effects, I mean, it's a lot of work. It's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing it to everyone else.
Thanks for listening to it.
For us here in the Philippines, it's a different perspective because it's Filipino Americans and it's about your story there. It's about your experience there. And hindi you understand a little bit of Tagalog naman.
No, if I understand anything, it's Cebuano.
Okay.
And only things related to food.
Okay. Thank you, Sapphire. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us and share your stories.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you again to Sapphire for sharing your stories. Your unique Filipino American perspective is a different view for those of us who grew up here. For those of you who want to know more of Sapphire's stories, you can follow her on Stories with Sapphire on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. She's also on YouTube where she animates short horror stories. If you like lore and you like our podcast, you'll definitely like her podcast. If you have similar stories you want to share, email us at paranormalsph@gmail.com. We'd love to hear it. The Paranormal Podcast is engineered and produced by F90 Productions. Rate and review our show on Spotify, Pocket Casts if you enjoyed it. Again, thank you for listening and stay safe.